They said I pushed her. They said I watched her fall. They said I stood on the edge of Greymoor Ridge while she bled on the rocks below and did nothing. My father was there when they read the charges. I remember looking at him, waiting for him to say one word, just one. Instead, he looked at the floor, and in that moment I understood something about my life. I wasn't being judged, I was being removed. 6 weeks later, they sold me to pay the pack's debt. If this story caught your attention, thank you for staying. Stories like this take heart to write, and knowing someone is truly listening makes all the difference. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe and comment where you are watching from. They sold me on a Tuesday, not to the highest bidder, not at first. First, they had to read the charges. That was the ritual. That was the part where the pack gathered in the training circle and the elder stood on the stone steps and listed every terrible thing I had supposedly done, so that when the bidding started, everyone present could feel righteous about it. They weren't buying a girl, they were buying justice. I stood on the auction block with my wrists bound in front of me, and I listened to Elder Voss's voice carry my name across the circle. And I looked at the crowd, and I looked for my father. He was there, third row, standing between Mora and Lizelle with his hands at his sides and his eyes on the ground. I stopped looking after that. The block was a raised platform of old timber at the circle's center, the same platform they used for pack announcements, for naming ceremonies, for the festivals where pups received their first ranking marks. I had stood on it twice before in my life. Once when my mother died and the pack came to acknowledge her passing. Once when I turned 16 and my wolf Ember first spoke, and everyone had celebrated because the quiet Omega's wolf had finally arrived. And wasn't that lovely? Wasn't that a relief? Now I stood on it in the gray morning with the smell of last night's rain in the dirt, and my wrists wrapped in rough cord, and the whole pack arranged in a ring around me. And I understood something I should have understood years ago. This platform was never mine. Nothing here was ever mine. I was allowed to stand on it when it suited the pack's story about itself, the grieving pack that honored its dead, the generous pack that celebrated its omegas. When my story stopped suiting theirs, the platform became something else entirely. It became a stage for getting rid of me. Nara, daughter of Aldrich, Elder Voss said. Her voice was the voice she used for serious matters, measured, regretful, performing a grief she did not feel. You are charged with the deliberate harming of Yeva, daughter of the Beta line, during the autumn ritual hunt. You are charged with causing her fall from the Greymoor Ridge. You are charged with leaving her broken and bleeding on the stones below while you returned to camp and said nothing. A murmur moved through the crowd, the specific murmur of people who had already decided and were confirming it for each other. The debt incurred by this pact to the Black Ridge Coalition stands at 1,200 weight of iron. Voss's voice did not change. The council has determined that assets will be liquidated to meet this obligation. The Omega Nara, having been found guilty of the charges against her, will be offered at auction as partial settlement. The bidding will begin now. That was it. That was all I got. No chance to speak. No witness called in my favor. No mention of the rope burns on my palms. The burns I had gotten reaching for Yeva over the ridge edge, grabbing for her wrist, missing, grabbing for the root instead, and hanging there screaming her name into the dark below until my voice gave out. No mention of any of that. The crowd arranged itself for bidding. I looked at my father's bent head and felt something in my chest go quiet and cold, like a fire that has been given too much water too fast. The dog appeared from somewhere near the eastern gate, and he was not a stray. I did not know this yet. I only knew that he was suddenly there, small and brown and low to the ground, moving with the cautious economy of an animal that knew it was somewhere it was technically not permitted to be. One ear folded and one ear up, lean and muscled tight, a brindle stripe across his face that looked like someone had drawn it as an afterthought. His eyes, amber, alert, older than the rest of him, found me on the platform like he had been looking for me specifically and was unsurprised to find me here. He trotted to the base of the platform and sat down beneath me and looked at the elder in the crowd with the expression of a creature who had made a decision and was waiting for the rest of the world to catch up with it. "Remove that animal," someone said. 2 pack boys moved toward him. He showed them his teeth, not a snarl exactly, more a statement, a correction. They stopped. No one in the crowd seemed to know what to make of it. Neither did I. The bidding was quick. I had expected it to be quick. I was not desirable. I was an accused Omega with no rank and no wolf strength worth noting, and the charges hanging over me made me a liability any smart wolf would avoid. The bids came in low and stayed low, and I stood on the platform and breathed and did not look at my father's bent head, and the dog sat below me like a sentinel and growled softly every time one of the pack boys tried to approach. Then a new voice came from the back of the circle. I had not seen the strangers arrive. They were not Greywood wolves. That much was obvious from the first glance. They were bigger, darker armored, with the specific stillness of soldiers who had learned to stand in crowds without becoming part of them. There were 3 of them, and they had been watching from the eastern gap in the fence line, and the one who spoke was the tallest, a lean, hard-faced man with a jaw like quarried stone, and eyes that had been doing calculations since the moment they arrived. 2,000 weight, he said. The circle went silent. 2,000 was nearly double the debt. 2,000 was not a bid, it was a message. The bid stands at 2,000 weight from General Vane of the Calder court. Another silence. A different kind. The word Calder moved through the crowd the way a cold wind moves through a room when a door is opened. Not a sound exactly, but a change in pressure. A held breath that passed from wolf to wolf like a thing being handed down a line. The Beast King, his man, here. No other bids came. "Sold," said Elder Voss, and the word landed in my sternum like a stone. They let me step down from the platform. General Vane's men came to take charge of my bindings, and I went with them because there was nowhere else to go, and as I stepped off the last plank of old timber, the dog fell into step beside me. Vane looked down at the dog. The dog looked up at Vane and then, past him, toward the gate, toward the direction they had come from, as if confirming that we were going to the right place. "He's yours?" I asked, before I could stop myself. Vane's expression flickered. Something careful moved across his face. "He belongs to the court," he said, which was not quite an answer. "He followed us when we left this morning. He does that sometimes." He turned toward the gate. The dog remained at my side. I followed. The dog followed me. I did not look back at the circle. I did not look for my father's face. I had already looked for it once this morning and found it turned away, and I was not going to spend whatever came next carrying the weight of looking for something I already knew was not there. Ember whispered inside me, faint, worn thin by 2 years of wolfsbane, barely more than a breath. "I am here," she said. "I am still here." "I know," I told her, out loud, to the empty road in front of me. The dog pressed his flank against my leg, warm and deliberate, and we walked through the Greywood gate for the last time. Chapter 2.
Greymark found her first. That was the thing nobody would ever know. Not Vane, not the court, not the wolves who watched me ride out that morning with my jaw set and my hands steady on the reins. Nobody would know that before Vane's party had even cleared the Greywood territory, before the auction block and the charges and the dog that would not come back inside. Greymark had gone still in the way he only went still when something fundamental was happening, and said, very quietly, in the language that lives below words, "There." I was at my desk. Supply reports. Wolves dependent on decisions I made before midday, and I was not in the business of stopping for feelings I could not immediately categorize. "There. So close." "Mate," Greymark said again. More certain this time, the way a wolf says a thing when he is not asking permission, only informing. I set down my pen. Sat very still at my desk for a long moment. Morning light through the eastern window. The specific creeping awareness of a man who has just felt something shift in his chest that he does not have the architecture to explain. I picked my pen back up. I finished the supply reports. I told myself it was the wind. Rook came back without Vane. This was the first problem. Rook had never left the court. Not in 3 years of campaigns, not in 6 territories taken. Not once in the entire history of the dog's residence at the fortress had he walked out the gate of his own volition and simply not come back with the party he left with. The gate guard reported it in the confused tone of a man describing something that had not technically violated any rule, but felt like it should have. The dog went east with the general's party, my lord. He did not return with them. I looked at the gate. Greymark was doing the thing he did when he was being deliberately unhelpful, sitting very still in the back of my awareness, radiating the specific satisfaction of a wolf who knows something and has decided his human will reach the correct conclusion on his own or not at all. "When are they expected back?" I asked. 3 days, my lord." I went back to my desk. Territorial dispute in the Northern Holdings. A court that did not run itself. I was not going to spend 3 days thinking about why my dog had walked east. I thought about it for 3 days. They arrived on the afternoon of the 3rd day, and I was at the window of the upper hall when Vane's party came through the gate, and I understood 2 things simultaneously. The first was that Rook was walking beside a girl on a horse, with his flank pressed against her stirrup, and his amber eyes forward, and his whole body carrying the specific language of a dog who has completed his mission and is bringing home what he went to find. The second was that Greymark, who had been watchful for 3 days, said nothing at all. He did not need to. I stood at the window and looked at the girl on the horse. Her wrists still bound, her spine straight, her eyes moving across the courtyard with the careful, cataloging attention of someone who had learned that knowing a room was a survival skill, and felt the bond pull in my chest like a rope catching on a root. I turned away from the window, went back to my desk. She is accused, I told myself. The charges may be true. I had bought Pack's convenient explanations for 20 years, and I knew what they smelled like, yes. But I also knew that guilt sometimes looked like dignity and innocence, sometimes looked like guilt. I was not in the business of letting my wolf make decisions that my court would have to live with. I prepared the room, lock on the inside, basic decency, not sentiment. Healer scent. She had bound wrists and had been on a horse for 3 days. That was logistics. Food left. Members of my court were fed. I did not go down. "She does not know," Greymark said that first night. Quieter than usual. Almost puzzled. "Know what? That we are there." A pause. "She cannot feel it. Her wolf is very far under." I sat with that for a long time. The wolfsbane. I had read the report. Escalating concentration 2 years. The last 6 months significant enough that any competent healer would have flagged it as punitive rather than standard. I had sent Mora with the counteragent before I had consciously decided to, which was itself information I did not examine too closely. Her wolf did not know. She did not know, which meant she had not come here chasing a bond. She had not felt what I felt and followed it. She had arrived on an auction block with rope burns on her palms and my dog at her stirrup, and no idea that any of this was happening. The bond disagreed with my timeline. By the 2nd day, it was loud. By the 3rd day, it was inconvenient. By the 4th morning, I woke before dawn with Greymark pressing against my ribs like a wolf that has been patient long enough and has decided that patience is no longer on offer. "She turned her palms down," Greymark said. "In the garden. She hides them. I knew what the palms were. I had read the report, and I knew, without knowing how, that she had been hiding them since the pack haul. That showing them had cost her something catastrophic, and she had filed the lesson accordingly. She is broken, I had told myself. Accused. Inconvenient. Wrong timing, wrong circumstances, wrong everything. She was not diminished. She was compressed. I had seen it from the window. There was a difference, and it was significant. I put on my coat. I went to the garden. She was smaller than I had expected, sitting on the bench with the dog's head in her lap, and her face turned toward the overgrown rose canes along the far wall. I had the specific, disorienting experience of recognizing someone I had never met. The shape of her stillness, the way she held herself with the careful economy of a person who had learned not to take up more space than necessary. I made myself walk to the far end of the garden. I looked at the roses because looking at her directly while Greymark was making this much noise felt like it would give too much away, and I had not yet decided how much to give. She had named the dog Rook. I had not expected that. I had expected something softer, something that would tell me she was sentimental, manageable, a person whose responses I could predict. Rook, for the chess piece, the defender, the one that moves in straight lines. I filed that. I filed the way she answered, level, without flinching, and the way she asked her question about Rook without realizing she was asking about herself. Because you are mine, Greymark said, not to me, to the air between us, to the answer that was already there. She did not hear it. I sat down on the bench at the far end and waited for Rook to settle between us and understood, with the specific resignation of a man who has lost an argument he was not aware he was making, that the 4 days had not changed anything. I was not going to be able to reason my way out of this. Tell me about the ridge, I said, because if she was guilty, I needed to know now, before this went any further. I needed Greymark's read on the truth of it, because Greymark could not be deceived by performance the way a person could. She turned her palms over. I had not asked her to. I had asked about the ridge, and she had thought about something. I watched something move through her face that was old and careful and tired, and then she had turned them over. I looked at the scars, and Greymark went completely silent. Not the silence of absence. The silence of a thing confirmed. I looked at the roses. I said, tell me in the only way I knew how to ask for something I needed, like a man who does not ask often and is choosing to now anyway. She told me. I listened to every word, and Greymark stayed silent the whole time with the specific, settled quality of a creature who has already known the answer and is simply waiting for the human to arrive at it. I stood up. I said the things I needed to say about the room and the work and Rook staying. I walked to the gate. Then I stopped. What was her name? Your wolf. I needed to know how far under she was, whether Greymark's certainty was real or if the wolf's bane had suppressed the bond so completely it would never surface. Ember, she said. I knew at the moment she said the name, faint, buried, but present. A fire that had been given too much water too fast, still burning underneath. Good, I said. I walked through the gate and stood on the other side of it with my hand flat against the stone wall and breathed. You see, Greymark said. Quiet. Without the urgency of the last 4 days. Just, you see? I stood there for longer than I would ever admit to anyone. Then I walked back to my desk and looked at the supply reports still waiting for me, and I thought, she does not know. She turned her palms over and told me the truth, and she does not know that Greymark has been certain since the moment she walked through the gate, that the 4 days of staying away had nothing to do with assessment and everything to do with a man who had spent 35 years building himself into something that did not need to be careful with people, because he simply did not need people, discovering that he had been wrong. I picked up my pen, I put it down, and went to bed.
Chapter 2. Let me tell you what actually happened on the Greymoor Ridge. Not the version Elder Voss read from her parchment, not the version Mora told to anyone who would listen in the 6 weeks between the hunt and the auction, not the version Lizelle performed with wet eyes in the pack hall, her hand pressed to her heart, while she described her dear friend Yeva falling and her terrible stepsister walking away. The real version, the one nobody asked for. The autumn ritual hunt was a pack tradition for unmated she-wolves of ranking age. We spread out across the Greymoor Ridge in pairs, tracking, and the pair that brought back the best kill shared a place of honor at the feast. Yeva and I had been paired together not by choice, by the luck of standing next to each other when the elder called partners. We did not dislike each other. We did not particularly like each other. We were two wolves doing a task assigned to us, and for most of the hunt, it was exactly that simple. We were working the upper ridge path when Yeva's footing gave out. The path was narrow and the rain the night before had made the stone slick, and she stepped wrong. I saw it happen. I was 4 paces behind her, and I saw the exact moment her boot found nothing where it expected ground, and she went over the edge. Fast, without a sound, here and then gone. I ran to the edge and I went to my knees and I reached. The rope I had with me was a hunting rope, thick and knotted, looped at my belt. I had it out and over the edge before I fully understood what I was doing. I screamed her name. I screamed for anyone nearby. I hung over the edge of the Greymoor ridge in the dark and cold, and I reached and the rope caught on something. A root, an outcrop, I never saw what. And I held it until my hands stopped being hands and became something else, something raw and burning. And eventually other wolves came and the real ropes came down and they brought Yeva up. She was alive, broken in places, bleeding in others, but alive. I was sitting in the path when they brought her up, both palms open, the rope burns already blistering, shaking in a way I had no control over. I looked at Yeva's face and she looked at mine and she said very quietly, in the specific exhausted voice of someone who has just survived something, "Thank you." That was what happened on the Greymoor Ridge. What happened after was Mora's work. I understood it only in pieces, the way you understand something that is being constructed behind your back. You see the corners of it, the edges, but the full shape doesn't reveal itself until it's already built and you're standing inside it. Mora had never wanted me in my father's house. My mother, his first mate, the woman he had loved before grief, turned him into the quieter, easier version of himself that Mora had found more convenient, had been dead for 7 years. And Mora had moved into the space my mother left with the efficiency of a woman who had been waiting for exactly that space. She brought Liesel. She rearranged the furniture. She changed which shelf held the flour and which held the salt. And when I moved the salt back because my mother had always kept it on the left side, Mora looked at me with a patience that was not patience at all. She had tolerated me for 3 years. That was what it was. Tolerance, managed and precise, the kind that stays until it becomes inconvenient. Yeva's fall was the inconvenience she had been waiting for. My father. I need to talk about my father. He loved my mother the way some wolves love, completely, structurally, in a way that the loss of her rearranged everything else. He was not the same man after she died. I understood that. I was 12 years old when she went, and I was standing in the room when it happened, and I understood even then, even at 12, that something was leaving with her that would not come back. He did his best. That is what I told myself for 7 years. He grieved. He was trying. He needed Mora's steadiness in ways I was too young to provide. He made choices that hurt me because he was surviving, and surviving people make choices that hurt other people. And that was the truth of it, and I was old enough to hold it. I held it for 7 years. What I could not hold, what I discovered on the morning of the accusation that I was not big enough to contain, was the moment in the pack hall when Mora laid out her case and every eye turned to me, and I looked at my father, and he looked at me. He looked at me. And then he looked at the floor. I showed him my palms, the rope burns, the proof of everything I had said. I held them out in front of him and I did not speak because what was there to say? And he looked at my palms for one long moment, and then he looked at the floor again. That was the day I stopped calling him father inside my own head. The Calder court was 3 days' ride east. I knew almost nothing about it. What the pack said about Calder himself was the specific kind of nothing that is actually too much. Stories built too tall, too jagged, too deliberate in their enormity to be purely true. The Beast King, the warlord who had taken 6 territories without losing a single campaign. The alpha whose wolf was so dominant that subordinate wolves sometimes shifted involuntarily in his presence. Who had no mate, who answered to no council, who collected tribute from conquered packs and gave back order in return. The stories always focused on the threat of him. I had never heard a story about what he actually was. Vane did not speak much. He rode at the front and his 2 soldiers rode behind me, and the dog trotted alongside my horse with the determined efficiency of a creature who had made a commitment and intended to honor it regardless of distance. On the second morning, one of the soldiers tried to shoo him off the road. The dog turned and looked at the soldier with amber eyes and a stillness that was more disconcerting than any growl, and the soldier pulled his horse back and said nothing more about it. Vane, who had watched this from ahead, turned in his saddle and looked at the dog for a moment. Then he looked at me. "What do you call him?" "Rook," I said. It had come to me the night before without deciding, for the chess piece, the defender, the one that moves in straight lines and does not pretend to be something other than what it is. He turned back to the road. "Apt," he said, which was the longest editorial he had offered since the auction. Then, after a pause, "He'll be glad to hear it." I looked at Vane's back. "Who will?" But Vane had already turned back to the road. The fortress appeared on the afternoon of the 3rd day. It was not what I expected, which was becoming a pattern with everything connected to Calder. I had expected something aggressive. High walls, dark stone, architecture that announced itself as a threat. What I saw was old, genuinely old, built from the gray mountain stone of the eastern range. Walls that had been repaired so many times in so many different materials that they had become a record of their own survival. Towers that were not ornamental. A gate that was heavy and functional and showed every year of use. It looked like something that had lasted because it was built to last, not because it was built to impress. The gates opened when Vane's party was still a quarter mile out. No announcement, no ceremony. The gates simply opened, the way a house opens when it hears familiar footsteps, and we rode through into a courtyard that was busy with the ordinary activity of a working settlement. Wolves moving with purpose, supply wagons being unloaded, the specific organized noise of a place that did not stop when visitors arrived. No one stared at me. They put me in a room with a door that locked from the inside. That detail took me several minutes to fully understand. I stood in the room. Small, stone-walled, with a narrow window and a cot and a table and a brazier already burning. And I looked at the door and at the lock on the inside of it, and I turned it over in my mind. Locked from the inside. Which meant I held the lock. Rook investigated the room with the thoroughness of a creature conducting a security assessment, sniffed every corner, checked under the cot, looked out the window at the courtyard below, turned twice in the center of the room, and then lay down in front of the door. Back to the door, facing me. "It locks from the inside," I told him. He thumped his tail. Once. A knock came shortly after, and I opened the door to find a young woman with close-cropped hair and a healer's satchel, who looked at my bound wrists with the clinical expression of someone who had noted a problem and intended to fix it. "The general said to see to your hands," she said. "May I come in? May I?" I stood in the doorway and absorbed the question and stepped back to let her through, and she came in and cut the cord from my wrists without ceremony and set about treating the chafe marks with something cool and clean. That night I lay on the cot and listened to the fortress settle into sleep and thought about the word sold. I was sold. I was property. I had been moved from one ledger to another, a line item in a debt settlement, an asset liquidated to meet an obligation. This was the legal and practical truth of my situation, and I was not going to pretend otherwise, because pretending required energy and I had none to spare. But the lock was on the inside of the door. The healer had asked permission. The food that had been left on the table was hot and real, and there was enough of it. Rook was asleep in front of the door with his chin on his paws and his amber eyes half open, and he was not growling. Rook growled at threats. He had been growling, in various registers, since the morning of the auction. He was not growling now. Ember stirred faintly in my chest. Her voice was the thin, careful voice of a wolf working against wolfsbane, each word costing something. "Something is different here," she said. "I know," I said, into the dark, into the stone-walled quiet of a room with a lock I held. "I know." I closed my eyes. Rook breathed at the door. I slept. And I decided somewhere in the edges of sleep that whatever this place was, I was not going to wait for it to show me what it wanted from me. I was going to find out for myself. So I told him, all of it. "You'll stay here," he said finally, "not as a dead asset. That categorization doesn't stand in this court. You'll have work if you want it. You'll have your room." "Why?" "Because I bought you at a fraudulent auction," he said. "Your pack had no legitimate grounds to sell a person against her will. They needed a debt paid, and they found the easiest person to sacrifice." He held my eyes. "I am not in the business of benefiting from that kind of transaction." He paused. "Rook stays with you. He is obviously going to. Even if I tried taking him back, he would not come with me. Since your arrival, I have lost my dog." "Why bid at all?" "Because if I didn't, someone else would have." He stood. "Someone who would not have given you a room with a lock on the inside." He walked to the gate. At the threshold he stopped, his back to me. "What was her name?" he asked. "Your wolf." The question landed in the center of my chest where Ember lived. Quiet, reduced, surviving. "Ember," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "She's still there," he said, not a question. "Yes, good." He walked through the gate. I sat on the stone bench in the overgrown garden, and Rook lifted his head and looked at me, and I pressed my face into his fur and breathed. And Ember. Thin, buried, persistent Ember, pressed back against my ribs with everything she had left. She had known, I thought, before I saw his face. Both of them had known. That night I went back to my room and laid on the bed, trying not to think about what happened earlier, and my wolf, though faint, was humming inside me. I didn't want to make a thing of it. I was bought. He will never look at me that way. Not a girl accused of the highest crime on earth. I remembered my mother, remembered what life was when she was around, and I said a silent prayer. "I wish you were here, Mama. This wouldn't have happened to me. I cried every night, but tonight I am too exhausted to cry." The Wolfsbane counter-agent appeared on the 9th day. Mira, the healer with close-cropped hair who had asked permission to enter the room, came to me with a small clay pot and set it on the table with the expression of a woman delivering news that is medically relevant and emotionally significant, and she intends to manage only the former. "The General's report from the Greywood Pack noted your suppression schedule," she said. "Monthly Wolfsbane injections for 2 years. Escalating concentration in the last 6 months." She looked at the pot. "This is a Wolfsbane counteragent. It does not reverse the suppression immediately. That is not how the chemistry works. But taken daily, it will begin to clear your system. 2 months, perhaps 3, before your wolf is fully restored." She paused. With your permission." "Who authorized this?" I asked. Mira's expression remained professional. The Alpha noted the escalating concentration in the report and asked me to address it. She pushed the pot closer. "It is yours to take or not. The choice is yours." I looked at the pot for a long time. I thought about what it meant that he had read the report carefully enough to note the Wolfsbane escalation, that he had connected escalation to harm in a context where most Alphas would have read it as routine Omega management, that he had asked his healer to address it and said the choice was mine. I took the pot. On the 12th day I was given work. "Not assigned?" asked. Mira came to say that the court's records showed I had 2 years of healer's apprentice training before the Greywood Pack repurposed me for kitchen labor, and that the fortress's medical stores were understocked, and she had more patients than ours, and would I be willing to help? I said yes before she finished the sentence. "Nara." He set it down.
"Calder. I came to the workroom on the 15th day because I had run out of reasons not to. That was the truth of it. I had spent 15 days finding them. The Northern Territorial dispute, the supply assessments, 3 meetings with Vane that I let run longer than necessary. And on the 15th morning I had sat down at my desk and understood that I had exhausted them. She was at the table with her hands in something that smelled sharp and green and faintly medicinal, and she looked up when I came to the doorway with the expression of someone who had noted my arrival and was waiting to find out what it meant. I said the thing about her hands healing. It was true. It was also not why I had come. I came in. I stood near the supply shelves because I did not know what else to do with myself, and the shelves gave me something to look at that was not her face. And Rook lifted his head from under the table, assessed, and went back to sleep with the efficiency of a creature who found the pace of all this only mildly exasperating. There were small clay pots arranged in a row, each marked in a careful hand. Rosemary, feverfew, something that might have been yarrow, the label slightly smudged, written as if the hand that made it had not been entirely steady. I picked up the smudged one. "What is this?" I asked. She looked over from the table, at the pot, at me. Something moved across her face that I did not immediately identify. It was only later, much later, that I understood it had been the first moment she had found me funny. "That is the one I labeled when my hands were still shaking. I have been meaning to relabel it." "What is it?" "I genuinely cannot remember." I set it down with the careful precision of a man who has just picked up something he thought was useful and discovered it was not, and who is pretending this does not constitute a small defeat. Rook's tail moved under the table. Once, something shifted in the room. Not dramatic. Nothing in this room was ever dramatic. I was coming to understand. Small? The shift of a temperature changing by a single degree. I turned back to the shelves. She turned back to her work. The fire was low and the fortress was settling into evening outside, and I thought, this is what it feels like. Not the bond. I knew the bond. The bond was loud and certain, and had been making itself known since the moment Greyark smelled her from miles out and said there like it was the simplest thing in the world. This was different. This was smaller. This was standing in a workroom that smelled like rosemary, looking at a mislabeled pot of something nobody could identify, and feeling, for the first time in longer than I could accurately calculate, that I was not performing anything. I was just there. Just a man in a workroom with a pot he couldn't identify and a woman who was letting him be there. "You see," Greyark said, quiet, without urgency. "Just, you see, I took the chair." "How is she coming back?" I asked, not looking at her, looking at the herbs.
"Nara." He set it down with the careful precision of a man who has just discovered he is holding something useless and is not quite sure how to acknowledge it without making it a thing. Under the table, Rook's tail moved. Once. Something in the room changed. Not dramatically. Nothing about this man was ever dramatic in the way the stories had prepared me for. But the temperature shifted, the way it shifts when a fire is given the right amount of air. And he turned back to the shelves and I turned back to my work, and I thought, there you are. Not the Beast King. Not the commander, the conqueror, the man the Pax whispered about. Just a person standing in a herb workroom, mildly defeated by a smudged label. "There you are. How is she coming back?" he asked, not looking at me, looking at the herbs. "Louder," I said, every morning a little louder. Something moved through his expression. Brief, warm, the kind of thing a person doesn't know they're showing. "Good," he said. And then, "Greyark is glad." I looked up at him. He was looking at the wall now with the expression of a man who has said something he did not entirely plan to say and is deciding whether to walk it back. "Your wolf," I said carefully. "Yes." He turned, met my eyes. He has been opinionated since the auction, since Rook came back without me and would not rest. His jaw moved. I should have come sooner. I did not know how to come without it meaning something I wasn't certain I had the right to mean yet. I held his gaze across the work table, across the scattered herbs and the clay pots and Rook's sleeping form between us. "You're here now," I said. He stayed until the fire burned low. He told me about his mother, gone before he was grown, the specific loss that reshapes a childhood into something with a permanent gap in it. About the first territory he took, when he was 23, and what he had expected to feel afterward and what he actually felt, which was nothing for 3 days and then grief, which she had not been able to explain to anyone, because how do you explain grief for a thing you chose? I told him about my mother's hands, about the specific way she had of preparing an herb, the patience of it, the unhurried attention, the sense that what she was doing was worth the care it took. About the morning she died, and the specific quality of the silence after, and how I had kept her way of doing things not as ritual but as conversation, as a way of still talking to her. I told him about my father, the 7 years I had spent understanding, extending grace, holding the complexity of a man who was doing his best. And then the moment in the pack hall when he found the floor with his eyes, and I found out exactly what his best had been worth. Calder listened the way he always listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I have looked away from things," he said, "in my life. Things I should have addressed and didn't because addressing them cost something I wasn't ready to pay." He held my gaze. "I know what it is to be on the other side of that, to be the thing that someone looked away from." "Who?" I asked. "My mother, when she was sick and the healers gave up. I was 17 and I believed them instead of fighting for her, and she died, and I have been fighting for things ever since." He looked at his hands. "She deserved better from me." The fire settled in the grate. Rook made a sleep sound. Outside, the fortress was quiet. "So did you," Calder said. "Deserve better." I did not say anything. I pressed my hands flat on the table and felt Ember pressing back from inside. "Yes," I said. "I did." He looked at me across the low burning fire with his gray eyes, and the thing in his face that had been arriving and retreating for weeks. And this time it did not retreat. It settled. It stayed. I looked back. I let it stay. He came back the next evening, and the one after that. Not announced, not with ceremony. He simply appeared at the workroom door at the same hour, knocked the same way, 2 quiet raps, and when I said come in, he came in and took the second chair and put his hands on his knees and talked to me the way people talk when they have stopped performing and started actually speaking. The 3rd evening, Calder arrived to find me struggling with a compound preparation, a pain tincture with a step that required both hands and more coordination than I was managing. He sat in the chair, watched for a moment. Then, "May I? Do you know herb work?" "No," he said, "but I have 2 hands and you need a 3rd. I told him what to hold. He held it, steady, patient, with the specific quality of attention of a man who has learned that some tasks require nothing more than showing up and being still. We worked in the firelight, and Rook slept, and the fortress settled into night around us. And when the preparation was done, I looked up and found him already looking at me. He looked away first, but not quickly. When he came back the next evening, the mislabeled pot had been moved to the end of the row, slightly separated from the others, with a new label in my careful hand. It said, "Unknown. Ask Mira." He sat down in the chair without saying anything about it, but something in his expression settled, the way a man looks when a small thing has confirmed something large. On the 5th evening, his fingers found mine in the space that was no longer a gap. His palm was warm, warmer than I expected, the warmth of a man who ran with all of himself, who put everything into whatever he held. I held on. I have known for a while. I was afraid to say it because the last time I had this, the last time there was a bond, it was with an alpha who used it as a weapon, who made the having of it a debt I owed him rather than a thing we shared. I held his gaze. I needed to know the difference before I said it. "And," he said, quiet, level, holding very still. "You are my mate," I said. Ember knows it and I know it, and Rook apparently knew it before either of us because Rook knows everything first and is smug about it. From beneath the table, Rook's tail thumped twice. Calder reached across the table and took my hand. His palm over mine, warm, scarred, the hands of a man who had built things and broken things and was learning, year by year, which was worth which. His thumb found the rope-burn scar on my right palm and rested there. "I have known since the auction," he said, "since Rook came back without me and would not rest, since Vane's report described a girl on a platform whose rope-burned palms told the whole story of who she was." He looked at where his thumb met my scar. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." "I'm ready," I said. He lifted my hand and pressed his mouth to the scar on my palm. Not a kiss exactly, something more deliberate, an acknowledgement, a recognition. The bond that was already there between us rang like a bell struck clean. An ember surged, and Greymark answered, and the room held it, and Rook let out a long theatrical sigh from under the table that was the most verbose thing he had ever communicated. He stayed that night, He learned my sleep and I learned his, and Rook arranged himself across both our feet with the satisfaction of a creature whose entire mission had reached its correct conclusion. "You have been lonely," I said once into the pre-dawn quiet. A long pause, his hand stilled in my hair. "I did not know that was what it was," he said. "I thought I preferred the quiet." He pressed his mouth to my temple. I was wrong. Chapter 7. This chapter is told from Nara's perspective. Sometimes when things begin to go a little too perfect, there is someone always there to try and make it stop. This is my problem now. Her name was Dava, and she had been at Calder's court for 4 years, and she moved against me with the precision of someone who had been watching his weaknesses for a long time. Not the loud, declarative hatred that announces itself and can therefore be addressed. The quiet kind. The kind that arrives dressed as concern, that presents its cruelty as care for the community, that smiles while it builds. Dava was the court's administrator, a wolf of ranking blood from one of the absorbed territories, sharp-minded and precise, who managed the logistics of the fortress with the organized thoroughness of a person who understood that real power lived in the details. She was excellent at her work. She had also been watching Calder with the patient, angled attention of a woman who had decided what she wanted and was waiting for the correct moment to reach for it. 4 years. She had been patient for 4 years. I was the thing that ended her patience. What I understood first was the feeling of a room changing when I entered it. Conversations that were warm becoming careful. Eyes moving to me and then away. Small exclusions. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to. The accumulation of moments when I was slightly outside the edge of something. On the 3rd week, a younger court wolf stopped me in the corridor. "Dava says you were accused of hurting someone." "I was accused," I said. "Yes. She says the charges were serious." They were also false." I held his gaze. "I have the scars on my hands from trying to save the person I was accused of harming. Would you like to see them?" He walked away quickly, but I had learned what I needed to learn. Dava was not operating alone. The phrasing the young wolf used, accused of hurting someone, was too careful to be gossip. It was a planted line, designed to sound like concern rather than accusation. This was not someone who disliked me. This was someone running a campaign. I have seen this play out countless times. My stepmother and sister, scheming and planting seeds of discord with my former pack, auctioning me to pay for a crime I didn't commit. I am done keeping quiet. I went to her. She was in the administrative wing, at a desk stacked with supply ledgers, and she looked up when I came in with the expression of a woman who had been expecting this visit and was ready for it. "Dava," I said. I closed the door. "I want to know what you're building and why, and I want to know now rather than after it's finished." Her expression did not change. That was impressive. I had come in without warning and she had not flinched. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." I sat down in the chair across from her without being invited. "You're seeding doubt about the Greywood charges through the court. You're selecting who you tell and how you frame it. You're not stupid enough to do this randomly. You're building something specific." I looked at her steadily. "I want to know what?" A pause. Something moved behind her eyes. Recalculation. She had expected me to be defensive. She had not expected me to arrive at her desk and ask the question directly. "I have concerns about the stability of this court," she said carefully. "That is not an answer." "It is the most honest answer I can give you." I looked at her for a long moment. At the ledgers, the desk, the 4 years of work that had made her indispensable to a man who was, I was beginning to understand, easier to manage when he was lonely. At the specific quality of her stillness, not relaxed, controlled. The stillness of a woman who was used to being the most strategically aware person in a room. She had not met me before. "Here is what I think," I said. "I think you have been at this court for 4 years and you have built something real here. I think that something is worth protecting. And I think the way you have chosen to protect it is by removing the threat before the threat can establish itself." I held her gaze. I am not here to dismantle what you've built. I am here because I was sold on an auction block and a dog sat beneath the platform while it happened. That is all I am. But I will not be removed quietly, Dava. I have been removed quietly before, and I know what it costs, and I am not willing to pay it again. The silence stretched out. What do you want? She asked. Her voice had changed, not warmer but more honest, the voice of a woman who had dropped one register and found another underneath it. I want you to stop, I said, and I want you to tell me if you hear anything from outside these walls that concerns me. I paused. You are good at information, so am I. We do not have to be enemies to both be useful. She looked at me for a very long time. Your stepmother wrote to me, she said quietly, 2 weeks ago. She wanted information about your position here in the Alpha's current situation. I told her something. A pause. I am telling you now. She walked away before I could respond. I stood in the corridor for a moment, recalculating everything. I went to Calder that evening. He was in the map room. The door was open and Vane was there, and I knocked on the frame and both of them turned and I said, Dava is telling the court about the Greywood accusations. I've spoken to her directly. She's not finished, but she's considering her position. I want a court meeting in 2 days where I can address the charges myself, in full, in front of everyone. Calder looked at me for a moment. You went to Dava directly. Yes, before you came to me. Yes. I held his gaze, because it was mine to handle. Something moved through his expression, not displeasure, something more complicated, the look of a man recalibrating. There is a court meeting tomorrow. Mora sent a letter saying she is coming. You will have the floor. Thank you. I turned to leave. Nara. I stopped. You do not owe this court an explanation, he said. You understand that. You are choosing to give one. There is a difference. I know, I said, but I have been silent about the truth for 8 weeks because silence seemed like the only way to survive. I am tired of surviving that way. He held my gaze. Yes, he said quietly. I imagine you are. Go and rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. I went back to my room. Rook pressed against my leg. He was looking down the corridor toward the gate. I couldn't sleep. A pull in my sternum that knew exactly which direction he was in and kept reminding me. Calder was awake. I could feel it the way I felt the fire through a wall. Not the flame itself, but the heat of it. He was somewhere in the upper corridor. Awake and not moving. The particular stillness of a man sitting with something heavy. I got up. Rook lifted his head at the door, stood, stretched from nose to tail and walked to the door. You're not helping, I told him. His tail moved once. He waited. His door was not latched. He was by the window, the one that faced east, toward Greywood, toward the direction from which everything was coming. He had not lit the candles. He sat in the dark with a cup of something gone cold in his hands, and he did not turn when I pushed the door open. But I felt his awareness shift to me through the bond the moment I crossed the threshold. You should be sleeping, he said. I couldn't. Neither can I. He set the cup down on the sill. I keep thinking about the hall tomorrow, about every way it could be arranged against you. I moved to stand beside him. I know. Then what? He was quiet for a long moment. When he turned, his face was the face he only showed in rooms with no one watching. Stripped of the Alpha's management, stripped of the weight of 20 years commanding things. Just the man underneath all of it. You, he said. I keep thinking about you in that hall, every eye on you, everything they decided you were, lined up on one side of the table. His jaw worked. I can handle the case. I cannot handle watching you stand at the center of it. Because you're worried I'll break. Because I know you won't. Something moved through his expression. Because I know exactly what it costs, and I cannot stand that it costs anything, that any of this costs you anything. I looked at him for a long moment. At the gray temples and the deep water eyes, at the man who had read the report and noticed the wolfsbane escalation and sent his healer with a counteragent and said the choice is yours, at the man who had sat in the workroom chair and held the pot steady and not. I am not afraid of tomorrow, I said, into the dark. His arm drew me slightly closer. I know, he said. A long pause. Then, in the quiet voice that was only for rooms with no one watching, I know, he said again. This time it meant everything it needed to mean. I closed my eyes. I lay still and listened. Nothing. The fortress settled into the night, the distant sound of a watch wolf on the outer wall. But I lay awake for a long time after that, looking at the ceiling, thinking about Dava's message, about the thread Mora had tried to pull. Chapter 8. This chapter is told from Nara's perspective. Mora arrived on a gray morning in the 5th week, not alone. She brought Liesel and 2 of the Greywood Pack's elder representatives, and she came with documentation. I had to admire the thoroughness of it, in a cold and distant way. She had prepared this the way she prepared everything, carefully, completely, with every angle covered and every exit blocked. I found out from Vane, who appeared at the medical workroom door at mid-morning, with his quarried stone face set in the expression he wore when he was delivering information he found professionally annoying. "Your stepmother is at the gate," he said. "She is requesting a formal audience with the court." I set down the preparation I was making. I set it down carefully because the pot was clay and my hands had gone unsteady and I was not going to break something because Mora had arrived. "What grounds?" I asked. "She is claiming that the sale of your person was illegitimate," Vane said, "that you were sold under fraudulent pretenses, that you are, under Greywood law, still bound to the Pack's authority on account of the unresolved charges against you, and that the Calder court's harboring of you without returning you to face those charges is an interference in Greywood Pack justice." I looked at the clay pot on the table, at my hands beside it. "She wants me back," I said. "Yes." I thought about the stockroom in my father's house, the thin mat, the portion that stopped appearing at the table, the floor that was always mine to scrub. "Set the audience," I said. "Calder found me before the meeting. Not to reassure me. He knew I did not need reassurance. He found me in the corridor outside the hall with his gray eyes reading me the way they always did, quickly and completely, and he said, 'I want you to know that whatever is said in that room, whatever case she makes, you are a member of this court. You are my mate. That does not change based on what any Greywood elder claims.'" I looked at him. "You're not worried about the interpack implications?" "I am the alpha of this territory," he said. "I have 30 soldiers in that hall and 6 years of trade agreements that the Greywood Pack's new leadership will not want to lose. I am not worried about the interpack implications." A pause. His hand found mine for a moment, a brief warm press. "Walk in there and say what is true. I'll handle the rest." And he did. The court hall was full. Word had moved through the fortress the way word always moved, in the specific speed of a community that lived in proximity. By the time Mora and her party were seated at one end of the long table, and Calder was seated at the other, and I was standing at the room's center, every wolf in the court who could find a reason to be there had found one. Mora looked at me for the first time when I entered the hall with the expression of a woman who had finally cornered something that had been making her life inconvenient. "The girl was sold under false pretenses," she said. "She is a convicted member of the Greywood Pack, subject to its laws, and the Beta Court had no authority to place her on the auction block without completing the formal charge process. She was sold before her sentencing was finalized, which renders the sale void under Interpack law. She is required to return and face her charges." The hall was very quiet. Calder looked at me. A question. I nodded. "Once." "You may proceed," he said to Mora and turned to me. "You will have equal time to respond, in full." "That is not," Mora started. "In this court," Calder said, with the specific quiet of a man who does not raise his voice because the weight of it travels without volume, "the accused speaks." Mora made her case. It took 20 minutes and it was well constructed, and every word of it was the arrangement of truth into a shape that was not true. Then it was my turn. "I want to show this court my hands," I said. I held them out, palms up. I walked to the table where the elders sat and I laid my hands flat on the wood and let every person in the hall see them. "These scars are from the rope at my belt on the night of the ritual hunt," I said. I reached over the Greymoor ridge for Yeva's wrist. I missed. I grabbed the root anchor instead and held it until other wolves arrived with better ropes. You can see the knot pattern in the skin. This is what a person looks like who tried to hold someone on the end of a rope in the dark. I looked at Mora. This is not what a person looks like who pushed someone and walked away. Mora's expression had gone very still. "I showed these scars in the Greywood Pack Hall," I said. "My father saw them. I looked at the elder representatives she had brought. He looked at them and then he looked at the floor. I would like to ask the Greywood elders here present whether he was called to account for that testimony. Chapter 9. This section is told from Nara perspective. Rook found the letter. I need to tell you this part because this is the part where the dog earns every bone that was ever left outside a door for him. While the court hall sat in its complicated silence after my question about Yeva, while Mora was recalibrating and Elder Dorn was looking at my palms and Calder was watching the room with the still attention of a man letting a situation develop before he intervened. She didn't notice the dog. Rook was sitting by the Beast King's throne. He wasn't growling. He was watching Mora with a chilling, human-like intensity. "The girl is a danger," Mora cried, her voice echoing. "She pushed Yeva. She is a murderer. We have the witness statements." Suddenly, Rook moved. He didn't bite. He didn't snarl. He walked straight to Mora's satchel, gripped the strap in his teeth, and wrenched it away with a strength that shouldn't belong to a dog of his size. He trotted to me. He dropped the bag at my feet and nudged a specific side pocket with his nose. "Get away from that beast!" Mora screamed, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. I reached into the pocket. My fingers closed around a piece of parchment, the original letter Yeva had written while she was recovering. The one Mora had intercepted. It wasn't just a letter. It was a confession of Mora's plan to use the fall to get rid of me. But that wasn't the twist. As I held the letter, I looked down at Rook. My hand brushed his head, and for a split second, the air changed. The smell of the hall, the cold stone and old wood vanished. It was replaced by the scent of wild jasmine and sun-warmed earth. My mother's scent. I froze. Ember didn't just scream this time. She went silent, a holy, reverent silence. I looked into Rook's amber eyes, eyes that I had once thought were just older than the rest of him, and I felt her. "Mom?" I whispered. The dog didn't bark. He simply leaned his head against my knee, the same way she used to hold me when I was a child and the world felt too loud. It was Yeva's handwriting. It was addressed to Elder Dorn. I did not read it out loud. I read it to myself in the hall's silence, and the words moved through me like cold water. Not painful exactly, but clarifying. Yeva had written to Dorn 3 weeks after the accusation. She had written that she had memory of the ridge night that did not match the account being given, that she remembered Nara's voice above her in the dark, that she remembered a rope and hands, and the sound of someone on the other end of the rope who was not letting go. That she had been told by her family that she was confused, that she was injured and her memory could not be relied upon, that she was afraid, but that she had written it down anyway because she could not remain silent about a thing this large. She had written it, and it had been in Mora's travel bag. "This letter," I said. My voice was my mother's voice, level, clear, the healer's voice, "is from Yeva. It was written 3 weeks after the accusation. It describes what she remembers of the night, on the ridge." I held it up. It was in my stepmother's bag. Elder Dorn rose slowly to his feet. His face had the look of a man who had just found out that he had been given incomplete information and was working through the implications. Mora moved first. She stood and said, "That letter was given to me for safekeeping by Yeva's family during her recovery. It was never submitted to the council because Yeva's account was deemed unreliable due to her injuries. It was not suppressed. It was set aside on medical advice." "By whom?" Calder said. "Quiet. Precise. The pack healer who serves under your household," Elder Dorn said. "Bring Yeva here," Calder said. Mora's composure broke. It was a small break, a single second where the mask was the wrong expression for the situation and her face showed what was underneath it, which was the fear of a person who has built something elaborate and is watching it find its cracks. She recovered in a breath. But I had seen it. I thought most of the room had seen it. "Yeva is still not walking," she said. "She cannot travel." "She wrote a letter," Calder said. "She can speak." He looked at Vane. "Send riders." "Calder," Mora said, and I heard the shift. Not Alpha, not the proper address, just his name, the form a person uses when they are trying to make something personal. "This is unnecessary. The girl has been adequately settled. She has a position here. There is no need to. The girl, Calder said, has a name. His gray eyes went to her with the quality of deep water that has not moved but intends to. And she is my mate and a member of my court. And you brought a fraudulent case into my hall using a letter that should have been submitted to your own council 3 weeks after the event in question. He stood. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. Nara.
This section is told from Cardle's perspective. I watched it happen from the throne. I saw Nara's face go white. I saw her hand tremble as she touched the dog. I saw Greymark go still, his hackles lowering in a way I had never seen in my life. "She knows," Greymark whispered. "The Guardian has finished her work." I looked at the dog, the stray that had appeared in my court 6 years ago, the week after the Greywood Omega's mother had died. The dog who had never left the fortress until the day Vane went to the auction. The dog who had led my men straight to the girl I didn't know I was looking for. "General Vane," I said, my voice like a landslide. "Arrest the woman. She has brought a lie into a house of truth." As the guards dragged Mora away, screaming about beasts and monsters, I stepped down from the dais. I stood before Nara and the dog. "He followed Vane to find you," I said softly. Nara looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't a dog that found me, was it?" I looked at Rook. Or rather, I looked at the spirit dwelling within the brindlefur. Greymark bowed his head, an alpha wolf bowing to a mother's ghost. "The dead don't usually stay," I told her, reaching out to take her scarred hand. "Unless the debt of love is greater than the debt of death."
Yeva arrived 4 days later in a cart with her broken leg splinted and her face pale from the journey and her eyes finding mine the moment she entered the hall, and I felt something in my chest unlock that I had not known was locked. She told it plainly. She was still afraid. I could see the shape of the fear in the way she held her hands in her lap, but she told it plainly. The path, the rain-slicked stone, her foot finding nothing, falling, and then a voice above her in the dark, and a rope and hands on the other end of it that did not let go even when they should have. She tried to hold me, Yeva said, to the court, to Elder Dorn, to all of them. She kept calling my name. She looked at her hands. I said thank you. When they brought me up, I saw her hands. I should have said it sooner. I was afraid. "I'm sorry." I shook my head. I could not speak for a moment. And then my father stood up. He had been at the back of the hall since the riders brought him, sitting with the held, careful stillness of a man who had been deciding something for 3 days. He stood, and he walked to the center of the hall, and he looked at me. Not at the floor. At me. "I saw her hands," he said. His voice was rough, the voice of a man who had been holding something heavy. "In the pack hall. I saw the rope burns. I knew what they meant." He stopped, started again. I looked away. I chose the easier thing, and I have known every day since what I chose. The hall was very still. "I cannot undo it," he said. "I am not asking for anything." He looked at me with his eyes full of the thing he had spent 6 weeks not showing. "I just needed you to know that I knew, that I always knew, and that I am sorry." I looked at my father, at the man who had looked at the floor in the pack hall and chosen Mora's convenient story over his own daughter's hands. I looked at him and I felt all of it, the grief and the fury and the 7 years of understanding I had extended. All of it at once. And I did not try to manage it or contain it or reduce it to something more comfortable. I held it. "I hear you," I said. That was all. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness was not a thing that arrived on demand. But I heard him, and he heard me, and the space between those two things was at least a beginning. He nodded. He went back to his seat. I looked up and found Calder watching me from the head of the table. Not with the Alpha's assessment, not with the calculation of a man weighing outcomes. Just watching me, the way he watched me in the small room late at night when he thought I was asleep and did not know I could see the shape of what was on his face. Chapter 10. Epilogue. 6 months later, the Greywood pack did not see a girl being returned. they saw an army arriving. The Black Ridge debt had not stayed settled. Without an Omega to blame, the pack had rotted from the inside. When the Calder banners appeared on the horizon, cyan and icy blue against the amber sunset, Elder Voss stood on those same stone steps, trembling. Calder didn't dismount. He sat atop his black stallion, a god of war in dark armor, and at his right hand I rode. No longer in rags, but in charcoal silks and furs, my head held high. Rook ran at my stirrup, his amber eyes fixed on the crowd. "We are here," Calder's voice boomed, "to settle the final account." My father stood in the third row. He looked older. Beside him, Mora's face was a mask of pale terror. She tried to step forward to perform her grief one last time. "Nara, dear, we thought—" "Silence," Calder said. The word was a physical blow. "You sold a daughter of this pack based on a lie. You poisoned a wolf. You attempted to murder a soul to cover a debt of iron." I stepped down from my horse. The pack parted like the sea. I walked toward the auction block, the timber platform where they had tried to break me. I looked at my father. He raised his eyes, weeping, but it was too late for tears. "The Greywood pack is dissolved," Calder announced, his hand moving to the hilt of his sword. "The lands are annexed. The leadership is stripped. Mora and Voss will be taken to the salt mines to work off the debt they so love to tally." He turned to me, his expression softening in a way that made the entire pack flinch in shock. He reached out, taking my hand, the one with the rope scars, and kissed my palm in front of everyone. "And Nara?" he asked, his voice low enough only for me and the wolves to hear. "What is your decree for the man who was your father?" I looked at the broken man. "Let him live with the memory of what he threw away," I said. "That is a heavier sentence than any chain." Years later, the stories of the Beast King changed. They no longer spoke of a warlord who took territories. They spoke of the Auction Omega who became the Moon Queen of the North. In the fortress of grey stone, the gardens were no longer overgrown. They were filled with roses and the sound of laughter. I stood on the balcony, my hand resting on the swell of my stomach. Calder stepped up behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. Greymoor and Ember were humming in unison now, a song of perfect alignment. Rook is teaching the pups to hunt, and the scent of my mom had vanished. She had completed her work here, Calder murmured, nodding toward the courtyard where our children tumbled in the grass with the old brindle dog. I leaned back against him. The girl who was sold on a Tuesday was gone. In her place was a woman who had been bought with a bit of 2,000 weight, but who was actually beyond price. "I am not a line item anymore," I whispered. "No," Calder replied, turning me in his arms to kiss my forehead. "You are the whole ledger. You are the story, Nara. And it's only just beginning. I was sold on a Tuesday. I was worth more than they knew. I am still learning the full amount. If this story found you, it was always going to. Subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell one person. Come back when the next video is ready.